The midnight sky hung like a velvet canopy over Sweetwater Valley, Montana. Stars punctuated the darkness, cold and distant as promises unkept. Eleanor Davis stood at her bedroom window watching her prized rooster Hector strut across the yard, crowing defiantly at the full moon, a phenomenon that had never occurred before tonight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Impossible, she whispered, her fingers tracing the antique pocket watch that hung from her neck. The timepiece had stopped precisely at midnight 3 nights ago, just as the first strange occurrences began on her struggling farm. First, the unseasonable frost, then the well water turning warm, and now this, a rooster crowing at midnight as if dawn had already broken. Eleanor's farm had been in her family for generations, but soon it would belong to the bank. The drought had taken everything, her crops, her livestock, her hope. Tomorrow she would sign the foreclosure papers, ending the Davis legacy in Sweetwater Valley forever. The only thing she couldn't understand was why time itself seemed to be unraveling around her in these final hours. A soft knock at the door downstairs startled her from her thoughts. Visitors at midnight were unheard of in these parts. Eleanor grabbed her father's old shotgun from above the mantel and made her way cautiously down the creaking staircase. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "Ethan Blackwood," came the reply, deep and resonant. "I need to speak with you, Miss Davis." Eleanor's heart skipped. Ethan Blackwood owned the neighboring ranch, 5,000 acres of prime grazing land that dwarfed her modest farm. They'd exchanged no more than a few words at town socials and market days. What could possibly bring him to her door at midnight? With the shotgun still in hand, she opened the door a crack. Ethan stood on her porch, his tall frame silhouetted against the moonlight. His weathered Stetson was clutched respectfully in his hands, dark hair falling across his forehead. "Miss Davis," he nodded, eyes briefly registering the shotgun before meeting her gaze. "I apologize for the hour." "It's midnight, Mr. Blackwood," Eleanor stated flatly. "Most folks around here consider that an unreasonable time for a social call." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I wouldn't be here if it weren't important." His eyes drifted past her to the grandfather clock in the hallway, its hands frozen at midnight. "May I come in?" What I have to say might sound unusual. Against her better judgment, Eleanor stepped back, allowing him entry. She didn't lower the shotgun. "Speak your piece, then." Ethan stepped inside, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. He seemed too large for her small farmhouse, his presence filling the space in a way that made the rooms feel suddenly cramped. "You've noticed it too, haven't you?" he asked quietly. The strangeness with time. Eleanor's grip tightened on the shotgun. "I don't know what you're talking about. Your rooster is crowing at midnight. Your clock has stopped. The seasons are shifting day by day on your property." He took a step toward her. "Miss Davis, your farm exists in a fold in time." A surprised laugh escaped her. "Have you been drinking, Mr. Blackwood?" "I wish I had been," he replied solemnly. "It would explain what I've been seeing. 3 days ago, I watched the sun rise over your eastern field. The light stayed there, Miss Davis. It didn't move for nearly an hour, while the rest of the valley continued as normal." Eleanor felt a chill race down her spine. 3 days ago, when her pocket watch had stopped. "The next day," Ethan continued, "I saw snow falling on your orchard while my own land remained in summer heat. And today, your rooster has been crowing since midnight, while the rest of the roosters in the valley won't wake for hours yet." "That's absurd," Eleanor whispered, but without conviction. She had seen these things herself, attributed them to exhaustion, to the stress of losing everything. "I've heard stories," Ethan said carefully. "Old tales from the native tribes who lived here long before our families arrived. They spoke of places where time behaves differently. Sacred spots where the future and past bleed into the present. And you believe my failing farm is one of these magical spots?" Eleanor scoffed, lowering the shotgun slightly. I believe, Ethan said, stepping closer, that something extraordinary is happening here. And I think it has something to do with you, Miss Davis. Before Eleanor could respond, a thunderous crowing erupted from outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats, dozens of them, approaching fast. Ethan moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. Were you expecting company? He asked, his voice tight. Eleanor joined him at the window. Across her moonlit property, a sight impossible to comprehend unfolded before her eyes. A herd of horses galloped across her eastern field, horses that shouldn't exist. Her father's prized Appaloosas, sold 5 years ago to pay for his medical care after the accident that claimed his life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Those are my father's horses, she breathed. But they're gone. They've been gone for years. Ethan's eyes found hers in the darkness. Time is bending around your farm, Miss Davis. The past is returning. Eleanor stumbled back from the window, her mind reeling. This isn't possible. Tomorrow you're signing the foreclosure papers, Ethan said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. How did you? Everyone knows. It's a small town. His expression softened. I came to make you an offer. Eleanor's defenses rose immediately. I'm not interested in selling to you, Mr. Blackwood. The bank will handle the auction. I'm not here to buy your farm, Ethan replied, surprising her. I'm here to help you save it. Eleanor studied his face for any sign of deception. Ethan Blackwood had a reputation as a fair man, but also a shrewd businessman. His ranch had expanded steadily over the past decade, while others failed. Why would you want to help me? She asked warily. Ethan gestured to the window where, impossibly, snow now began to fall despite the summer heat. Because whatever is happening here is bigger than foreclosure papers and property lines. This land has chosen you, Eleanor Davis, and I think we both need to understand why. The land hasn't chosen me, Eleanor snapped, sudden anger flaring. If it had, my crops wouldn't have failed, my parents wouldn't be dead, and I wouldn't be losing everything tomorrow. Or, perhaps, Ethan suggested quietly, it's fighting to keep you here. The grandfather clock suddenly chimed loudly, startling them both. The hands remained fixed at midnight, yet it tolled 13 times before falling silent. Stay, Ethan said, his voice low and urgent. Don't sign those papers tomorrow. Give me 1 week to help you understand what's happening here. Eleanor laughed bitterly. And how exactly am I supposed to stop a foreclosure that's been in motion for months? I'll cover the outstanding amount, Ethan said simply. Consider it an investment. In what? A farm where roosters crow at midnight and snow falls in August. Impossibility. His eyes held hers steadily. Even time bends for you, Eleanor Davis. That has to mean something. Before she could form a response, a thunderous crack split the air. The front door flew open, cold wind whipping through the house. Outside, the full moon disappeared behind racing clouds. The rooster crowed again, more frantically now. Something's coming, Ethan murmured, moving protectively toward Eleanor. Across the yard, a figure materialized from the darkness. Tall and lean, dressed in clothes from another era. As he stepped into the pool of light from the house, Eleanor gasped. Papa? The figure of Thomas Davis, dead for 5 years, stood in the yard, but something was wrong. His form seemed transparent at the edges, flickering like a candle flame in wind. It's not really him, Ethan warned, his hand finding her arm. The time distortion is creating echoes. The apparition of her father raised an arm, pointing urgently toward the old barn. His mouth moved, but no sound emerged. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he vanished. The night fell still again, the only sound Eleanor's ragged breathing. I'm losing my mind, she whispered. No, Ethan insisted firmly. But you might be losing time itself. We need to see what he was pointing at. Minutes later, lantern in hand, Eleanor led Ethan across the yard toward the dilapidated barn. The ancient structure had stood empty for years, housing nothing but dust and memories. As they approached, the rooster Hector darted past their feet, rushing into the barn ahead of them. "That bird knows something we don't," Ethan muttered. Inside, the air felt different, heavier, charged with something Eleanor couldn't name. Dust motes danced in the lantern light, moving in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, swirling in impossible ways. The rooster stood at the far end of the barn, crowing at an old tack trunk Eleanor had forgotten existed. "My mother's trunk," she said, moving toward it. "It's been locked for years." The key was buried with her. As she approached, the lock clicked open on its own. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Ethan, who nodded encouragingly. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid. Inside lay her mother's treasures: photographs, letters, a wedding dress carefully folded, but atop everything else sat an unfamiliar leather-bound book, its cover emblazoned with strange symbols that seemed to shift when viewed directly. "What is this?" Eleanor murmured, lifting the book carefully. "A journal," Ethan said, leaning closer. "And not your mother's, judging by the date." The first page bore an inscription: "Property of Josephine Davis, 1843. "Josephine Davis?" Eleanor's brow furrowed. "I don't know any Josephine in my family." 1843 was when this valley was first settled," Ethan said. "Your family's been here that long. Longer, according to my father. The first Davis built this farmhouse in 1842. She turned the brittle pages carefully, revealing elegant script and detailed drawings of the farm, but a farm both familiar and strange, with buildings that had never existed. "Listen to this," Eleanor said, reading aloud. "August 15, 1843. The phenomenon continues. Time moves differently on our land. I have watched seeds grow to maturity in days rather than months. The well water heals sicknesses that doctors cannot name. And last night my rooster crowed at midnight as the stars rearranged themselves overhead." Eleanor's hands shook as she looked up at Ethan. She experienced the same things. Ethan took the journal gently, turning more pages. "I believe this land exists at a crossroads of time." He read. "The natives called it the place where tomorrow meets yesterday. They would not build here, would not farm here. Now I understand why. The power is too great, too dangerous in the wrong hands." "This is madness," Eleanor whispered. But the evidence was all around them. The rooster still crowing at midnight, the snow falling outside in August, her father's ghost pointing the way. "There's more," Ethan continued, his finger tracing the faded words. "I have learned to harness this power in small ways. A fold in time can be useful when drought threatens or illness strikes. But there is a cost. Each manipulation leaves a tear in the fabric between then and now. Too many tears, and the past begins to leak into the present." A sudden gust of wind extinguished their lantern, plunging the barn into darkness, save for moonlight streaming through the cracks in the walls. When Eleanor's eyes adjusted, she gasped. The barn had transformed around them. No longer dilapidated, the structure appeared new, the wood fresh and strong, tools hanging neatly on walls. A horse whickered from a stall that had been empty moments before. "It's showing us the past," Ethan breathed. Just as suddenly, the vision disappeared, the barn returning to its decrepit state. Eleanor clutched the journal to her chest. "I need to read all of this," she said. "If my ancestor found a way to control these time folds, maybe I can too. Maybe I can save the farm. Or maybe that's what's causing the phenomenon in the first place," Ethan suggested. "Your desperation to save your home, Your connection to this land runs deeper than property deeds, Eleanor. Your family has been its guardian for generations. A thought struck her suddenly. Why do you care so much, Mr. Blackwood? You barely know me. Ethan's expression grew distant. My grandmother was a full-blooded Crow. She told me stories about places like this, sacred spaces, where the veil between times grows thin. She believed they should be protected at all costs. He met Eleanor's gaze directly. When I saw the sunrise linger over your farm, I knew the stories were true. So this is academic curiosity? Eleanor challenged. No, Ethan said simply. This is about preservation. Of your family's legacy, of something miraculous. And, perhaps, he added more softly, of you. The implications of his words hung between them, unexpected and charged with possibility. Eleanor had always seen Ethan Blackwood as distant, unreachable, the successful rancher who had no time for struggling farmers. Now he stood in her barn at midnight, offering help she desperately needed for reasons she couldn't fully comprehend. A powerful gust of wind suddenly tore through the barn, rattling the walls. Outside, a storm was gathering, unnatural and focused entirely over Eleanor's property. Lightning flashed, illuminating the yard where more figures from the past now walked. Farmhands who had worked the land decades ago, her mother hanging laundry on a line that no longer existed, her father mending a fence that had been torn down years before. The tears are getting worse, Ethan said urgently. We need to stabilize the time fold before the past completely overwhelms the present. How? Eleanor demanded. I just learned about all this 10 minutes ago. The journal, Ethan insisted. There must be answers there. Josephine Davis found a way to control it. Eleanor flipped frantically through the pages, scanning for anything useful. Near the end, a passage caught her eye. The anchor point is the key. When time unravels, only blood and intention can reweave it. Stand at the heart, speak to the land, and remember, what was, what is, what will be, all exist together in the fold. The heart of the farm, Eleanor murmured. The old oak. Without waiting for Ethan, she rushed from the barn, the journal clutched tightly against her chest. The massive oak tree that stood in the center of her property had been there for centuries, predating even the first Davis settlers. Her father had once told her it was the soul of the farm. As she ran, the world around her flickered between past and present, the farmhouse appearing new, then weathered, then half-built. The orchard bloomed with spring blossoms, then heavy summer fruit, then stood bare with winter, all in the space of seconds. When she reached the oak, Eleanor pressed her palm against its ancient bark. "Tell me what to do," she whispered. The response came, not from the tree, but from behind her. "Let it go, Eleanor." She whirled to find a man standing there, not Ethan, but a stranger in modern clothes, with a familiar face that made her heart stop. "David?" she whispered. David Chen, her former fiancé, stood before her, looking exactly as he had the day he'd left 2 years ago, after telling her he couldn't marry a woman who would choose a failing farm over a future in the city. "This isn't real," Eleanor said, backing away. "You're not here." "I'm as real as you need me to be," David said, his voice exactly as she remembered. "I've come to take you away from here, just like you always wanted." "I never wanted to leave," Eleanor protested. "You assumed that." "Because no one in their right mind would choose this." David gestured around at the farm. "A life of struggle and poverty when you could have had comfort and security with me in Seattle. She didn't choose wrong." Ethan's voice cut through the night as he approached from the barn. "She chose her heritage, her responsibility." David's form flickered slightly, like a television with poor reception. And look where that got her. Foreclosure, failure, talking to ghosts in the middle of the night. "You're not real," Eleanor repeated more firmly. "You're just another tear in time." "Or I'm your future," David countered. "The path you should have taken." "It's not too late, Eleanor. Sign the papers tomorrow. Take the money and come find me in Seattle. We can start over." Eleanor felt a pull toward him, an echo of the love she'd once felt, the future she'd once imagined. For a moment, the storm seemed to quiet, the time distortion settling. "He represents the easy path," Ethan said quietly, walking away. "What exactly are you offering instead?" Eleanor challenged, turning to him. "A week to solve an impossible problem? Then what? I still lose everything." "Not if we find a way to harness what's happening here," Ethan insisted. "Your ancestor did it, you can too." "Or she could stop fighting the inevitable," David interjected. "Some things are meant to end, Eleanor. This farm had its time." The pocket watch at Eleanor's throat suddenly grew warm. When she touched it, the hands began to move, not forward, but backward, spinning rapidly as if rewinding time itself. Around them, the farm transformed. Buildings disappeared. Others arose in their place. The oak tree shrank, then grew, then shrank again. Generations of the Davis family flickered in and out of existence around them, living, working, dying, all in the space of seconds. Only Eleanor, Ethan, and the apparition of David remained constant in the chaos. "You have to choose," Ethan urged. The journal said blood and intention. "Your blood, your intention. What do you want, Eleanor? What future are you choosing for this land?" "I want to save it," she whispered. "I've always wanted to save it." "Then why is time unraveling?" David challenged. "Deep down, you know it's time to let go." A terrible understanding dawned on Eleanor. The time distortions began 3 days ago. When I finally accepted defeat. When I stopped fighting and agreed to sign the foreclosure papers. "Your connection to this land goes beyond ownership," Ethan said. "Your family has been its guardian for generations. When you decided to surrender that responsibility, time itself rebelled." Eleanor finished, trying to show me what would be lost. She looked between the two men, one from her past offering escape, one from her present offering a chance to fight. But the answer, she realized, lay in neither direction. It lay within her own connection to this place, this soil, this legacy. Eleanor opened the journal to its final page, where words she hadn't noticed before now glowed faintly in the darkness. "The land remembers. The land endures. The land forgives." With sudden clarity, Eleanor knew what she had to do. She knelt at the base of the oak tree, pressing both palms against the earth. "I am Eleanor Davis," she declared, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Daughter of Thomas and Margaret Davis, granddaughter of William and Ruth Davis, great-granddaughter of Samuel and Josephine Davis. This land has been entrusted to my family's care, and I renew that promise now." The pocket watch at her throat burned hot against her skin. Eleanor removed it, recognizing it now for what it truly was. Not just a family heirloom, but a physical manifestation of her connection to this place. "I will not abandon my responsibility," she continued. "I will find a way to preserve this legacy, to honor the trust placed in my bloodline. I choose this land, not just as property to own, but as a sacred trust to protect." She pressed the watch into the soil at the base of the oak. As she did, the hands began to move forward again, slowly at first, then faster, aligning precisely at midnight once more. A shock wave of energy pulsed outward from the tree, washing over the entire farm. The apparition of David dissolved into mist. The storm clouds overhead dispersed. The ghostly figures from the past faded. The rooster, which had followed them to the oak, crowed one final time. But now, in the distance, the first hints of dawn colored the eastern sky. Ethan stood silently, watching as normalcy returned to the farm. "You did it," he said finally. "You stabilized the fold." Eleanor rose unsteadily to her feet, exhausted but filled with a strange new certainty. "Not permanently. The journal says the guardian must constantly maintain the balance. That's why my family has always been tied to this land, why we've never sold it despite hardships." "And the foreclosure?" Ethan asked gently. Eleanor looked toward the horizon, where her land stretched out before her, beautiful even in its current state of neglect and drought. I still have no way to pay the bank. Nothing has changed in the real world. Everything has changed, Ethan contradicted. Now we know what's at stake. And my offer stands 1 week to find a solution, with my financial backing to hold off the bank. Why would you do that for a stranger? Eleanor asked, finally voicing the question that had been nagging at her since his arrival. Ethan smiled faintly. My grandmother didn't just tell me stories about places like this. She told me about the families chosen to guard them. The Davis family has protected this land for generations. My family, the Blackwoods, were meant to be allies in that protection. What do you mean? Look at the journal again, Ethan suggested. The author's full name. Eleanor opened to the first page, reading the inscription she'd overlooked before. Property of Josephine Davis, née Blackwood, 1843. We're not strangers, Eleanor, Ethan said quietly. Our families have been connected since the beginning. I think that's why I was able to see the time distortions when no one else could. As the sun crested the horizon, casting golden light across the farm, Eleanor looked at Ethan Blackwood with new eyes, not as the successful neighbor who had everything she lacked, but as someone bound to her by ties older than either of them had imagined. So what happens now? She asked. Now, Ethan said, we find a way to save your farm that doesn't involve tearing holes in the fabric of time. And I think, he added, glancing at the journal in her hands, the answers might be right there in your ancestors' writings. Eleanor looked down at the book, its pages now filled with additional text that hadn't been there before, as if Josephine Davis had somehow known her descendant would need more guidance and had sent it across the decades. The land provides for its guardians. Eleanor read aloud. One must simply know where to look. The rooster crowed again, this time a normal morning call. Somehow, Eleanor knew that tonight it would not crow at midnight. The immediate crisis had passed, but the greater challenge remained, preserving her family's legacy and the mysterious power contained within the boundaries of Davis Farm. As the new day dawned, Eleanor stood at the crossroads of past and future, the weight of generations on her shoulders, but no longer alone in bearing it. Whatever came next, she would face it with the knowledge of her true heritage and with an unexpected ally at her side. The week that followed passed in a blur of discovery and revelation for Eleanor. Each morning she woke before dawn, joining Ethan in the meticulous study of Josephine's journal. Each evening, they walked the boundaries of her property, mapping the places where time still felt thin, where the veil between past and present remained fragile. Your great-great-grandmother was extraordinary, Ethan remarked on the third day, as they pored over Josephine's detailed drawings of the farm. She understood what was happening here better than anyone. She had decades to study it, Eleanor replied, tracing her finger over a diagram of underground water channels that crisscrossed the property. We have 4 more days before the bank takes everything. Ethan looked up from the journal, his expression thoughtful. The water patterns she mapped, they don't match any geological survey I've ever seen of this valley. Eleanor nodded, excitement building. Because they're not natural formations. Look at how precisely they're arranged, how they converge under the oak tree. My ancestor engineered this somehow. Or the land showed her where to dig, Ethan suggested. Either way, these water channels could explain why your farm has survived droughts that devastated others over the centuries. But not this drought, Eleanor sighed, reality crashing back. Whatever system Josephine created, it's clearly broken now. Or blocked, Ethan corrected, rising from the kitchen table where they'd spread out the journal pages. These channels should still exist. We just need to find them. By mid-afternoon, they stood in the parched field behind the barn, armed with shovels and the weathered pages of Josephine's journal. According to her diagrams, a primary water channel should run directly beneath their feet, feeding into a larger reservoir under the oak tree at the center of the property. This makes no sense, Eleanor said after an hour of digging yielded nothing but dry earth. The channel should be right here. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, studying the journal again. Wait, look at this notation in the margin. Channel sealed during the Great Shake of '68. There was a massive earthquake in this region in 1868. What if it collapsed the water system? Then why wouldn't subsequent generations have repaired it? Eleanor demanded. My family wouldn't just abandon something so crucial. Unless they didn't know about it, Ethan said quietly. When did your family stop experiencing time distortions before now? Eleanor thought back to the family story she'd grown up with, tales she'd always assumed were fanciful inventions. My grandfather mentioned strange occurrences during his childhood, but said they stopped after his father renovated the farmhouse in the 1940s. What kind of renovations? He modernized everything: plumbing, electricity. Eleanor's eyes widened. The well. He capped the old well and drilled a new one closer to the house. They exchanged a look of understanding before racing across the field toward the old well site, a spot Eleanor had barely noticed since childhood. Just a circular stone foundation, partially obscured by weeds. The well itself sealed decades ago. Help me with this, Ethan said, already pulling at the heavy wooden cover that had been secured over the opening. Together they managed to shift it aside, revealing a dark shaft descending into the earth. Ethan shone a flashlight into the depths. There's water down there. Not much, but it's there. After 5 years of drought? Eleanor asked incredulously. That's impossible. Not if this well taps into Josephine's water system, Ethan replied. A system that might connect to underwater sources even modern drilling couldn't reach. Eleanor stared into the darkness of the well, a spark of hope kindling in her chest. If we could restore this system, your farm would have water again, Ethan finished. Even during drought. The bank wouldn't foreclose on a property with reliable water access, Eleanor breathed. Not in this region, not after 5 years of drought. It would be too valuable. Ethan nodded, excitement evident in his eyes. We need to follow these channels, find where they're blocked, and clear them. In 4 days? Eleanor asked skeptically. With the right equipment, yes. Ethan straightened, a plan already forming. I'll bring my ranch hands and machinery tomorrow. If Josephine's diagrams are accurate, we can trace the entire system. Your men will think we're crazy, Eleanor warned. Ethan's mouth quirked in a half-smile. They're paid to dig, not to question why. Besides, he added more seriously, water is water. In Montana, that's reason enough for anything. That night, Eleanor sat alone on her porch, the journal open in her lap. Beyond the practical details of the water system, Josephine had documented her discoveries about the time anomalies themselves, how they strengthened during celestial events, how certain spots on the property served as focal points where past, present, and future bled together most readily. The land speaks to those who listen, Josephine had written. It shows what was and what could be. The Davis family does not merely own this land. We are bound to it, guardians of a threshold between worlds. A soft footfall on the porch steps pulled Eleanor from her reading. Ethan stood there, a thermos in hand. Thought you might want some coffee, he said, offering it to her. It's getting cold. Eleanor accepted gratefully, suddenly aware of the chill that had descended with nightfall. Find anything new in the journal? More questions than answers, she admitted, making room for him on the porch swing. Josephine understood the water system perfectly, but the time phenomena were still a mystery even to her. She calls us guardians of a threshold but never fully explains what that means. Ethan settled beside her, his warmth a contrast to the evening air. Some things defy explanation, says the cattle rancher who's helping me chase underground water channels based on a 150-year-old journal. A low chuckle escaped him. Fair point. They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that had developed between them over the past few days of shared purpose. Eleanor found herself studying his profile in the dim porch light, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar above his eyebrow, the way his eyes reflected the stars overhead. Why did you really come here that night? She asked suddenly. The truth, Ethan? He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. I told you about my grandmother being Crow. What I didn't tell you was that she was also a seer, someone who could sense disturbances in the natural world. And you inherited this ability? Not exactly. Ethan shifted, meeting her eyes. But the night your watch stopped, I dreamed of this farm. I saw the oak tree splitting open, revealing a stairway that descended into the earth. At the bottom was a pool of water that reflected not the present, but all possible futures. Eleanor's breath caught. What did you see in the water? You, he said simply, standing at a crossroads. In one direction, the farm thrived again. In another, it was consumed by my ranch. your house torn down, the oak tree cut for timber. And you came to prevent that future? Eleanor asked, struggling to understand. I came because in every version of the future where your farm survived, we were standing together, Ethan admitted, his voice low. And in every version where it was lost, you faced the bank alone. The implications of his words hung between them, too significant to be immediately addressed. Eleanor turned her attention back to the journal, but her mind raced with questions about destiny and choice, about the strange connection that had formed between them in just a few days. We should get some rest, Ethan said eventually, standing. Tomorrow will be a long day. As promised, dawn brought Ethan's ranch hands. 6 weathered men who asked no questions when instructed to dig precisely where Eleanor indicated, following the invisible lines of Josephine's water channels. By midday, they had uncovered the first major blockage, a collapsed section of the underground channel, about 50 yards from the old well. It's just as you thought, Eleanor told Ethan as they examined the earthen tunnel, reinforced with old timber that had partially rotted away. The earthquake must have caused this section to cave in. And without maintenance, the entire system eventually failed. Ethan nodded. But the channels themselves are still here. We just need to clear and reinforce them. For 2 days, they worked tirelessly, digging, clearing, rebuilding. Eleanor's hands, once soft from teaching at the local school before returning to save the failing farm, grew calloused and strong. She worked alongside Ethan's men without complaint, driven by a desperate hope that Josephine's system could be restored in time. On the evening before bank foreclosure, they finally reached the central chamber beneath the oak tree. It was larger than Eleanor had imagined, a circular space 10 feet in diameter, its walls lined with fitted stone that had withstood the test of time far better than the wooden supports in the channels. This is incredible engineering for the 1840s, Ethan marveled, his flashlight illuminating the chamber. Your ancestor was remarkable. At the center of the chamber lay a circular pool, bone dry but intact. Channels from all directions converged here, designed to fill this central reservoir before redistributing water throughout the property. Will it work? Eleanor asked, her voice echoing slightly in the underground space. Only one way to find out, Ethan replied. We've cleared all the main blockages. If there's water still flowing in the deepest channel, it should reach here by morning. They climbed back to the surface as twilight descended over the farm. Ethan's men packed up their equipment, heading back to his ranch with promises to return tomorrow to see the results of their labor. Eleanor and Ethan stood alone by the oak tree, physically exhausted but humming with anticipation. Thank you, Eleanor said simply, knowing the words were inadequate for all he had done. Don't thank me yet, Ethan cautioned. We won't know until morning if the system works. Even if it doesn't, Eleanor insisted, you've done more for me than anyone ever has. You believed when no one else would have. Ethan's expression softened. Get some rest, Eleanor. Whatever happens tomorrow, you fought for this land with everything you have. Your ancestors would be proud. Morning came too quickly. Eleanor had barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. She dressed mechanically and made her way to the oak tree, where the entrance to the underground chamber lay open, waiting. Ethan was already there, sitting patiently on the edge of the opening. He stood when he saw her approach, his expression unreadable in the early dawn light. Have you looked? She asked, her heart pounding. I waited for you, he replied. It's your farm, your legacy. Together they descended the earthen steps into the chamber. Eleanor's flashlight beam trembled slightly as she directed it toward the central pool. Water. Clear, cool water filled the basin, its surface reflecting their astonished faces. Around them, the sound of gentle flowing indicated that the channels were active, carrying water throughout the property. It worked, Eleanor whispered, tears springing to her eyes. Josephine's system worked. Ethan knelt by the pool, running his fingers through the water. This changes everything. With this system restored, your farm has the most reliable water source in the county. The bank still arrives at noon, Eleanor reminded him, though her voice now held hope rather than resignation. Then we'd better be ready for them, Ethan replied, a smile spreading across his face. I believe it's time to renegotiate your loan terms. They emerged from the chamber to find Ethan's foreman waiting for them, an urgent expression on his weathered face. "Boss, we've got company," he announced, pointing toward the road. "Looks like the bank men are early." A sleek black car was indeed approaching, kicking up dust along the dirt road leading to the farmhouse. Eleanor felt panic rise in her throat. "They're not supposed to be here for hours yet," she protested. "We need time to document the water system, to prove its value." "Then we'll make time," Ethan said firmly. "John," he addressed his foreman, "get the men to uncover all the access points to the water channels. I want them clearly visible when these gentlemen arrive." As the car pulled up to the farmhouse, 3 men in expensive suits emerged, looking distinctly out of place against the rural backdrop. Eleanor recognized the center figure immediately. Harold Montgomery, the regional bank director who had personally denied her last extension request. "Miss Davis," Montgomery called, approaching with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. "I see you're entertaining visitors. I hope we're not interrupting." "Mr. Montgomery," Eleanor acknowledged, stepping forward with more confidence than she felt. "You're early. Our appointment wasn't until noon." "I thought we might conclude our business without delay," Montgomery replied smoothly. "The paperwork is prepared, requiring only your signature to finalize the foreclosure." Ethan moved to stand beside Eleanor, his presence solid and reassuring. "I believe there have been significant developments that might affect the bank's position, Mr. Montgomery." Montgomery's eyes narrowed slightly as he assessed Ethan. "Mr. Blackwood, isn't it? I wasn't aware you had an interest in the Davis property." "A neighborly interest," Ethan replied evenly, "in ensuring fair treatment for a valued member of our community." Montgomery's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "The bank has been more than fair, extending deadlines repeatedly despite Miss Davis's inability to make payments. Business is business, after all." "Indeed it is," Eleanor interjected, drawing herself up to her full height, "which is why I believe you'll be interested in reassessing the value of this property before proceeding with foreclosure." "The assessment was completed months ago," Montgomery dismissed. "The drought has rendered this land nearly worthless, except for the acreage itself." "Things change," Eleanor said. "I'd like to show you something before we proceed with any paperwork." Curiosity warred with impatience on Montgomery's face. Finally, he gestured to his companions. "Very well. A brief inspection, then we conclude our business." Eleanor led the bank officials toward the oak tree, where Ethan's men had fully uncovered several access points to the water system. The central chamber was now clearly visible, the sound of flowing water audible even from the surface. "What exactly am I looking at, Miss Davis?" Montgomery asked skeptically. "A water management system that predates modern irrigation," Eleanor explained. "Designed by my ancestor Josephine Davis in the 1840s, it taps into underground water sources unaffected by surface drought." One of Montgomery's companions stepped forward, interest piqued. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the chamber entrance. "Please," Eleanor nodded. The man descended carefully, emerging minutes later with an expression of undisguised amazement. "It's remarkable," he told Montgomery. "A fully functioning water distribution system independent of rainfall or river access. In the current drought conditions, this technology is significant." Montgomery's expression remained impassive, but a calculating look entered his eyes. "Even so, Miss Davis, your outstanding debt remains. Water or no water, the bank requires payment. Which is why I'm prepared to offer a new arrangement," Eleanor countered. "My farm now possesses the only reliable water source in the valley. I propose a partnership with the bank, investment in expanding this system to neighboring properties in exchange for loan restructuring." Montgomery scoffed. "The bank is not in the water business, Miss Davis." "In a 5-year drought, everyone is in the water business," Ethan interjected. "The value of this farm has just increased tenfold, at minimum. Foreclosing now would be leaving money on the table." Eleanor could see the calculations happening behind Montgomery's eyes. "Consider the publicity value alone," she pressed. "The bank that helped preserve a historic water system during the worst drought in memory, instead of the bank that seized a family farm dating back to Montana's territorial days." The third bank official, who had remained silent until now, leaned close to Montgomery's ear, whispering urgently. Montgomery's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps," he conceded reluctantly, "there is room for discussion. A 60-day reassessment period might be arranged, during which time we could evaluate the unique attributes of the property." 90 days, Eleanor countered, with a full suspension of foreclosure proceedings pending new valuation. Montgomery's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "I'll have the paperwork drafted. This doesn't erase your debt, Miss Davis. It merely postpones our reckoning." "I understand perfectly," Eleanor replied, extending her hand. "I look forward to our next meeting, when we can discuss the true value of Davis Farm." After a moment's hesitation, Montgomery shook her hand before motioning to his colleagues. Without further ceremony, they returned to their car and departed, leaving a trail of dust in their wake. Once they were out of sight, Eleanor's composed facade crumbled. She sank to her knees beside the oak tree, overwhelmed by relief and lingering disbelief. "We did it," she breathed. "We actually did it." Ethan knelt beside her, his smile reflecting her own amazement. "You did it, Eleanor. You saved your farm." "For 90 days, she reminded him, though she couldn't suppress her joy. "We still need to convince them of the system's true value." "We will," Ethan assured her. "Montgomery might be stubborn, but he's a businessman. Once he sees the potential here, he'll restructure your loan." Eleanor looked around at her land, the fields that might now flourish again, the orchard that could be revived, the legacy that would continue. For the first time in years, possibility stretched before her instead of inevitable loss. "None of this would have happened without you," she told Ethan. "You saw something worth saving here when everyone else had given up, including me." Ethan's expression grew serious. "There's something I need to show you," he said, offering his hand to help her up. "Something I found in the journal last night but didn't have time to share before the bank arrived." Intrigued, Eleanor followed him to the farmhouse, where Josephine's journal lay open on the kitchen table. Ethan turned to a page near the end, where a detailed family tree had been drawn in fading ink. "Look at this entry," he said, pointing to a name midway down the page. "Thomas Blackwood, married to Elizabeth Davis, 1872. Eleanor stared at the names, understanding slowly dawning. My great-great-grandfather had a sister who married a Blackwood? Not just any Blackwood, Ethan said quietly. My great-great-grandfather. Our families didn't just know each other, Eleanor. They were joined by marriage. Elizabeth Davis Blackwood was the last Davis to live on this farm until the connection was broken. What happened? Eleanor asked, fascinated by this unexpected link between them. According to family stories, Elizabeth and Thomas moved to Wyoming after a falling out with her brother, Ethan explained. The nature of the disagreement was never recorded, but it was serious enough that the families lost touch completely. Until now, Eleanor murmured. Until you dreamed of the oak tree and came to my door at midnight. Ethan nodded, his eyes holding hers. I think that's why I could see the time distortions. Blood calls to blood, even across generations. The implications hung between them, too profound to be fully grasped in that moment. Their families, once united, then divided, now brought together again by the very land that had been at the center of it all. There's more, Ethan continued, turning to the final page of the journal. Josephine's last entry, written just before her death. Eleanor leaned closer to read the faded script. The guardian's duty passes through blood, but the land chooses its protector. When the Davis line falters, look to where branches diverged. The tree remains whole beneath the soil, even when its canopy is split by storm. She knew, Eleanor whispered. Somehow she knew our families would separate, and that someday they might need to reunite to protect the land. The land exists at a crossroads of time, Ethan reminded her, quoting from earlier in the journal. Perhaps Josephine glimpsed the future just as we saw echoes of the past. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the farm. Ethan's ranch hands were packing up the last of their equipment, their work complete for now. The water system hummed beneath their feet, channels filling, reservoirs rising, life returning to soil long parched. What happens now? Eleanor asked, echoing the question she'd posed days earlier beneath the oak tree. This time, Ethan's answer was different. That depends on you, Eleanor. The immediate crisis is averted. You have 90 days to develop a business plan the bank can't refuse. But beyond that, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Beyond that, I think our families, histories, suggest a path forward, if you're willing to consider it. A partnership? Eleanor suggested, her heart beating faster. To start with, Ethan agreed, his voice low and earnest. The Blackwood Ranch has resources you need. Davis Farm has a water system my land could benefit from. Together, we could create something remarkable. And personally, Eleanor asked boldly, surprising herself. Ethan's smile was slow and warm. Personally, I find myself drawn to a woman who would fight time itself to protect her heritage. A woman who stands her ground against bankers and drought alike. A woman I'd like to know better, if she's willing. Eleanor thought of David's apparition, offering escape from responsibility. She thought of Richard, who had courted her casually for years without ever truly seeing her connection to this land. And she thought of Ethan, who had believed in impossibilities, who had worked alongside her in the dirt and dust, who had seen value where others saw only failure. I'm willing, she said simply. As if in response, the pocket watch she still wore around her neck began to tick, its rhythm steady and true for the first time since that midnight, when her rooster had crowed out of season. Eleanor placed her hand over it, feeling the pulse of time moving forward again, not in disarray, but in harmony with the land and its guardians. Outside, Hector the rooster crowed once, announcing not midnight or dawn, but a moment that existed perfectly in its proper time. Eleanor Davis stood in her ancestral kitchen, facing a future unforeseen yet somehow predestined, with a man whose bloodline had been entwined with hers long before either of them drew breath. The time distortions had settled. The land had found its guardians once more. Autumn painted Sweetwater Valley in fiery hues of amber and gold. 3 months had passed since the bank had granted Eleanor the extension. 3 months of relentless work transforming Davis Farm from a failing property to a model of innovative water management. Today, Montgomery would return with his associates for the final assessment, and Eleanor felt oddly calm as she stood on her front porch, watching the sun rise over land that now pulsed with renewed life. Ready for the big day? Ethan asked, joining her with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Eleanor accepted hers gratefully. As ready as I'll ever be. The presentation is prepared, the projections are solid, and the system is functioning perfectly. Then Montgomery would be a fool not to accept your proposal, Ethan said confidently. And whatever else he may be, Harold Montgomery is no fool when it comes to money. They had spent countless hours together over these months, their partnership evolving naturally from necessity to something far more profound. Ethan had introduced Eleanor to agricultural experts from the State University, investors interested in drought-resistant farming techniques, and historical preservationists eager to document Josephine's engineering marvel. Meanwhile, Eleanor had immersed herself in her ancestors' journal, deciphering cryptic notations about the land's unique properties and implementing techniques that had been forgotten for generations. The time distortions had ceased entirely, but other phenomena had emerged. Crops that matured with unexpected speed, wells with water that seemed to possess unusual healing properties, soil that remained fertile despite minimal irrigation. Have you decided whether to tell Montgomery about the special properties of the water? Ethan asked, voicing the question that had troubled them both. Eleanor shook her head. Only what can be scientifically verified. The mineral content is exceptional. The filtration through the underground channels removes impurities. Those facts alone make it valuable. The other aspects, she hesitated, thinking of the remarkable recovery of Ethan's prized bull after drinking from the central reservoir, and how the blighted section of her orchard had flourished after just 2 weeks of irrigation from the ancient system. Will remain our secret, Ethan finished for her. Probably wise. The sound of vehicles approaching drew their attention. Not just Montgomery's sleek black car this time, but a small procession. 3 cars, and what appeared to be a news van from the regional station in Helena. What's this about? Eleanor murmured, suddenly uneasy. Stay calm, Ethan advised, though his own expression had tightened. Whatever game Montgomery's playing, we're prepared. They descended the porch steps together as the small convoy pulled up. Montgomery emerged first, looking smugly pleased with himself. Behind him came his usual associates, followed by a woman with a reporter's notebook and a camera crew setting up equipment. "Miss Davis," Montgomery called with artificial joviality, "I hope you don't mind the additional guests. Given the historic nature of your water system, I thought some publicity might benefit all parties involved." Eleanor exchanged a quick glance with Ethan, reading the warning in his eyes. This was not standard procedure for a loan reassessment. "Mr. Montgomery," she replied evenly, "I wasn't aware today's meeting would be a media event." "Transparency serves everyone's interests," Montgomery said dismissively. "Now, shall we begin the tour? I believe you have quite the presentation prepared." With little choice, Eleanor led the enlarged group toward the central oak tree, where the entrance to the underground chamber had been properly reinforced and fitted with a secure door. As she explained the basics of Josephine's water system, the reporter took notes while the camera captured footage of the access points and channels now visible across the property. "And you claim this system was designed in the 1840s?" the reporter asked, clearly skeptical. "Before modern irrigation techniques were developed? "We have documentation confirming its origin," Eleanor confirmed, careful not to mention the journal itself. They had created sanitized versions of Josephine's diagrams, removing any references to time distortions or other unexplainable phenomena. "Remarkable engineering for a frontier woman," the reporter commented. "Almost unbelievable, one might say." Eleanor felt her defenses rise. "My ancestor was exceptional. The proof is all around you. A functioning water system that has survived nearly 2 centuries and continues to operate even during the worst drought in Montana's recorded history." Montgomery stepped forward, his expression solicitous. "Perhaps we should move on to the financial aspects, Miss Davis. After all, while historical curiosities are fascinating, the bank's primary concern is viability." In the farmhouse kitchen, now converted into an impromptu conference room, Eleanor presented her business plan, a comprehensive strategy for leveraging the water system into a sustainable operation. Phase 1 involved restoring Davis Farm to full productivity. Phase 2 proposed controlled water sharing with neighboring properties for a fee. Phase 3 outlined the potential for agricultural tourism and educational programs centered around historical water conservation techniques. "As you can see," she concluded, "the projected revenue exceeds my loan obligations within 18 months, with significant growth potential thereafter." Montgomery listened without interruption, his face unreadable. When Eleanor finished, he turned to his associates, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Very impressive, Miss Davis," he said finally. "Creative, comprehensive, and potentially lucrative, however." Eleanor's stomach tightened at that single word. "There is the matter of intellectual property to consider," Montgomery continued smoothly. "I don't understand," Eleanor said, though a cold suspicion was already forming. Montgomery opened his leather portfolio, removing a document with the bank's letterhead. "Your original loan agreement includes standard clauses regarding collateral. As you know, the bank has a secured interest in all assets of Davis Farm, including, our legal team believes, any historical infrastructural systems discovered on the property." Ethan stepped forward, his voice dangerously quiet. "You're claiming ownership of a water system that predates your bank's existence by decades." "Not ownership," Montgomery corrected with a thin smile. "Merely the right to determine its optimal utilization given Miss Davis's outstanding debt. We believe this system has applications far beyond one small farm." The reporter was scribbling furiously, the camera operator capturing every word. "This is why you brought the media," Eleanor realized aloud. "To announce your takeover of the water system before I could protest." "I prefer to think of it as sharing a remarkable discovery with the public," Montgomery replied. "The bank intends to develop this technology for the benefit of the entire region. We're prepared to be quite generous in our terms. Forgiveness of your remaining debt in exchange for unrestricted access to the system and its documentation." Eleanor felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath her. After everything, the time distortions, the discoveries, the backbreaking work of restoration, Montgomery intended to seize control of Josephine's legacy and commercialize it without restriction. "The system is integrated with the land," she argued. "It can't be separated from Davis Farm without destroying its functionality. Our engineers believe otherwise." Montgomery countered. "With modern technology, the core principles can be replicated elsewhere. Of course, the original system would remain in place, with appropriate compensation to you for access rights. And if I refuse, Montgomery's expression hardened, then the original foreclosure proceeds as scheduled. The 90-day extension ends today, Miss Davis. Without the bank's acceptance of your business plan, the debt comes due in full. A tense silence fell over the kitchen. The reporter looked between them, clearly sensing the conflict that made for compelling news. The camera continued to record. "May I have a moment to consult with Mr. Blackwood?" Eleanor asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Montgomery inclined his head graciously. "Of course. We'll wait here." Outside on the porch, beyond the hearing of Montgomery and his entourage, Eleanor's calm facade crumbled. "They planned this all along," she said, anger and despair warring in her voice. "The extension was just to give them time to figure out how to claim the water system." Ethan's expression was grim but thoughtful. "There's something we're missing. Why bring the media? Montgomery could have made these demands privately." "To humiliate me publicly?" Eleanor suggested bitterly. "To ensure I couldn't fight back without looking like I'm depriving the region of a vital resource during a drought? Or," Ethan said slowly, "because he's not as confident in his legal position as he pretends. The media presence works both ways, Eleanor. If Montgomery is seen strong-arming a historical family farm out of an ancestral innovation..." Understanding dawned. Public opinion would turn against the bank. "Exactly," Ethan nodded. "He's betting you'll cave rather than fight publicly. But what if we call his bluff?" Eleanor considered this, her mind racing. "I need to see the exact language in my loan agreement, and we need to buy time." Back in the kitchen, Eleanor addressed Montgomery with renewed composure. "I'd like my lawyer to review the relevant clauses in my loan agreement before we proceed further. Given the complexity of this situation, that seems only reasonable." Montgomery frowned. "The terms are quite clear, Miss Davis, and our offer expires today with the extension." "Then I must decline," Eleanor said firmly, noting the flicker of surprise in Montgomery's eyes. "The water system is an integral part of Davis Farm's heritage and future viability. I won't surrender control of my ancestors' innovation." "Perhaps," the reporter interjected unexpectedly, "Mr. Montgomery could clarify the bank's position for our viewers. Is the bank truly claiming ownership of a historical water system created by a pioneer woman during Montana's territorial days?" Montgomery's confident smile faltered slightly. "Not ownership. A security interest, as clearly defined in standard loan documentation, which predates the discovery of the system," Ethan pointed out. "How can a security interest apply to an asset neither party knew existed when the loan was executed?" The reporter turned to her camera operator with raised eyebrows, clearly recognizing the story evolving before her was different from what Montgomery had promised. "Furthermore," Eleanor added, seizing the momentum, "I've consulted with the Montana Historical Society about designating the system as a protected historical landmark. Their representatives are scheduled to visit next week." This was a bluff. She had made initial contact with the Historical Society but hadn't yet filed formal paperwork. Montgomery, however, couldn't know that. "A landmark designation would severely restrict any development plans," she continued, watching Montgomery's expression carefully. "I imagine your engineers would find that problematic." One of Montgomery's associates leaned close, whispering urgently in his ear. The banker's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps we've been hasty," Montgomery conceded after a moment. "Historical preservation is certainly an important consideration. The bank has always valued Montana's heritage." "How wonderful to hear," Eleanor replied, maintaining her composure despite the surge of hope. "Then you'll understand why I can't agree to unrestricted access to the system without proper protections in place." Montgomery seemed to reassess the situation, particularly with the camera still recording. A reasonable compromise might be reached. The bank could partner with the Historical Society to ensure proper preservation while still allowing beneficial use of the technology. "I would welcome such a partnership," Eleanor agreed, "provided Davis Farm maintains primary control over the system and its implementation." The negotiation continued for another hour, with Montgomery gradually retreating from his initial demands as the reporter's questions made it increasingly clear that a public battle would cast the bank in an unfavorable light. By the time they adjourned for lunch, a tentative framework had been established. The bank would restructure Eleanor's loan with favorable terms, in exchange for a minority partnership interest in a new entity that would manage controlled expansion of the water system. As the group dispersed temporarily, the reporter approached Eleanor privately. "This isn't the story Montgomery led me to expect," she admitted candidly. He pitched this as a feel-good piece about the bank saving a historic innovation from obscurity. "And now?" Eleanor asked. The reporter smiled. "Now I have a much better story about a determined woman fighting to preserve her family's legacy against corporate appropriation. Mind if I get some additional background on your ancestor Josephine? Female pioneers who made technological innovations are rare subjects." By the time Montgomery and his associates returned from lunch, the narrative had shifted decisively. What had begun as the bank's media coup had transformed into Eleanor's platform for highlighting Josephine's forgotten achievement and her own struggle to maintain her family's stewardship of the land. The final agreement, drafted by evening, was far more favorable than Eleanor could have hoped that morning. The bank would receive a 20% interest in the newly formed Davis Water Conservation Trust with profits, designated first to satisfy Eleanor's restructured loan, then to be reinvested in expanding the system to drought-affected properties throughout the valley. Most importantly, control of the system would remain with Eleanor as the Davis family representative. As Montgomery and his entourage finally departed, the setting sun casting long shadows across the revitalized fields of Davis Farm, Eleanor and Ethan stood together on the porch, watching the dust settle on the road. "We did it," Eleanor said softly, still hardly believing the day's outcome. "They came to take everything, and instead, you secured your family's legacy for another generation." Ethan finished. "Josephine would be proud." Eleanor leaned against the porch railing, sudden exhaustion washing over her. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You would have found a way," Ethan assured her. "You're a Davis. Apparently stubbornness runs in your bloodline." She laughed, the tension of the day finally breaking. Says the equally stubborn Blackwood. As darkness fell, they walked together to the oak tree, now illuminated by soft lights that highlighted its ancient grandeur. The entrance to the underground chamber was secured for the night, the water flowing silently beneath their feet, nurturing the land as it had for generations. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, echoing the question that had punctuated their journey from the beginning. Eleanor turned to him, seeing in his face the same mixture of exhaustion and elation that she felt. "Now we build something remarkable. The trust, the educational programs, the expansion to neighboring farms." "And us?" Ethan asked quietly. The question hung between them, weighted with all that had developed over these intense months. They had worked side by side, strategized together, fought together, but always with the immediate crisis as their focus. Now, with that crisis resolved, the nature of their partnership required redefinition. Eleanor thought of that first night when her rooster had crowed at midnight, and Ethan had appeared at her door with an impossible explanation that had proven true. She thought of his unwavering belief when everyone else had abandoned hope, his willingness to invest his resources and reputation in her fight, the natural ease that had grown between them despite their inauspicious beginning. "I think," she said carefully, "that our ancestors might have had the right idea, joining the Davis and Blackwood families." A slow smile spread across Ethan's face. "Are you proposing a merger, Miss Davis?" "I'm proposing possibility," she replied, echoing his words from that first night. "Even time bent for us to find each other, Ethan Blackwood. That has to mean something." In response, Ethan closed the distance between them, his hand gently cupping her cheek. When his lips met hers, Eleanor felt a resonance that seemed to extend beyond them, as if the land itself approved of this union long forestalled. Winter came to Sweetwater Valley with unusual gentleness that year. Light snow dusted the fields of Davis Farm, but beneath the blanket of white, the soil remained vital, nourished by Josephine's reclaimed water system. In the farmhouse, transformed now with fresh paint and restored woodwork, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with the journal open before her, adding her own entries to those of her ancestor. "Continuing the tradition?" Ethan asked, entering with an armload of firewood. Eleanor nodded, looking up from her writing. "I want future generations to understand not just the mechanics of the water system, but its deeper significance, the responsibility that comes with this land." "Speaking of future generations," Ethan said, setting the wood beside the hearth, "the adoption agency called while you were in town. They've approved our application for the initial review stage. Joy bloomed in Eleanor's chest. After much discussion, they had decided to begin the process of adopting a child, perhaps even siblings, who needed a home and a legacy. The Davis line would continue, even if not by blood. "That's wonderful news," she said, rising to embrace him. Their wedding 2 months earlier had been a simple affair beneath the oak tree, with the entire community in attendance. The story of Davis Farm's revival had spread throughout the region, bringing visitors curious about the historical water system and the woman who had created it. Eleanor had established the Josephine Davis Foundation for Women in Engineering, funded by a portion of the water system's proceeds to provide scholarships for young women pursuing innovations in sustainable agriculture. The bank, recognizing the positive publicity generated by their partnership with the Davis Water Conservation Trust, had become an unlikely ally in promoting the expansion of the system to other drought-affected properties. Montgomery himself had retired shortly after the negotiations, replaced by a younger banker more enthusiastic about community development initiatives. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, settling into a chair beside Eleanor, "about expanding the conservation efforts beyond water management." "What did you have in mind?" Eleanor asked, intrigued. "The Blackwood Ranch has extensive grazing land that could benefit from more sustainable practices. If we integrated some of Josephine's principles of working with natural systems rather than against them." Eleanor smiled, recognizing the spark of innovation that had drawn her to him. "A holistic approach to ranching and farming? Combining our knowledge and resources?" "Exactly," Ethan nodded eagerly. "Your ancestor understood something profound about this land, that it's not just soil and water, but a living system with its own patterns and rhythms. If we could apply that understanding to modern agricultural challenges, we could create a model for the entire region," Eleanor finished, excitement building. "Drought-resistant, sustainable, and respectful of the land's natural properties." They spent the evening planning, their visions for the future expanding and intertwining just as their lives had done. Outside, snow continued to fall gently, blanketing the valley in pristine white. Beneath the ancient oak tree, the water flowed through channels laid generations ago, carrying life and possibility to lands long thirsting for renewal. In the bedroom that had once been hers alone, Eleanor placed Josephine's journal in the special case they had crafted for it, alongside the pocket watch that had stopped at midnight on that fateful night. The watch now kept perfect time, its steady ticking a reminder that even the most fundamental forces could be disrupted when something essential was out of balance, and restored when harmony returned. Spring arrived with unprecedented vigor. Fields that had lain dormant for years burst into vibrant green, fruit trees blossomed with abandon, and the first visitors arrived for the newly established educational tours of the historic water system. Eleanor and Ethan had converted one of the outbuildings into a visitor center, featuring exhibits on Josephine's engineering innovations and the Davis family's stewardship of the land. On a particularly beautiful April morning, Eleanor stood at the edge of her property, watching as Ethan worked with his ranch hands to integrate a section of the water system with the adjoining Blackwood lands. Their homes remained separate, the Davis farmhouse and the larger Blackwood ranch house 2 miles away, but their operations had become increasingly unified, each complementing the other's strengths. A familiar vehicle approached along the road, and Eleanor recognized the reporter who had been present during the confrontation with Montgomery. Rachel Stevens had become an unexpected ally, her initial story about Davis Farm sparking regional interest that had grown into national coverage of rural innovation during climate change. "Eleanor," Rachel called, waving as she parked and approached. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Eleanor assured her. "We're always happy to see you." Rachel glanced toward the oak tree, where tourists were gathered for the morning's first educational tour. "Business seems to be booming." "Beyond our expectations," Eleanor agreed. "People are hungry for solutions to drought, for connections to history, for hope that the challenges we're facing can be overcome." "That's actually why I'm here," Rachel said. "My editor wants to do a feature on successful climate adaptations in rural communities. Your water system, combined with Ethan's regenerative ranching practices, makes for a compelling case study." They walked together toward the central chamber, now fitted with viewing platforms that allowed visitors to observe the water system without disturbing its operation. Eleanor explained the latest innovations they had implemented: solar-powered monitoring systems that tracked water flow and quality, experimental sections where they were testing enhancements to Josephine's original design, educational programs that brought school children and agricultural students to learn from this marriage of historical wisdom and modern technology. "What strikes me," Rachel said as they completed the tour, "is how personal this all is for you. This isn't just a business venture or an environmental project. It's a continuation of something your ancestor began nearly 2 centuries ago." Eleanor nodded, gazing across the flourishing landscape that had so recently teetered on the edge of ruin. Josephine understood something essential that our modern world often forgets: that we don't own the land. We're in relationship with it. When that relationship is respectful and attentive, both parties thrive. When it's exploitative or neglectful, both suffer. "And the time anomalies?" Rachel asked hesitantly. "There have been rumors." Eleanor smiled enigmatically. "Old farms have their mysteries. What matters is the present we're creating and the future we're building." As Rachel departed with promises to return for more extensive interviews, Ethan joined Eleanor beneath the oak tree, his arm slipping naturally around her waist. "Any more unusual phenomena to report?" he asked quietly, referring to their ongoing monitoring of the property for signs of time distortions. "Nothing since last fall," Eleanor replied. "I think the land is satisfied with our stewardship for now." "Good," Ethan said, his expression softening. "Because I'd prefer our children grow up without roosters crowing at midnight, or snow falling in August." Eleanor leaned into his embrace, her heart full. The journey that had begun in crisis had led to places she could never have imagined: a thriving farm, a pioneering conservation trust, a partnership both personal and professional that honored the best of both their family legacies. Hector the rooster strutted across the yard, crowing appropriately at midday, announcing the present moment with perfect timing. The pocket watch at Eleanor's throat ticked in synchrony with the natural rhythms of the land, no longer fighting against time but moving harmoniously with it. Beneath their feet, water flowed through ancient channels, nurturing soil that had weathered drought and neglect to flourish once more under attentive care. Eleanor Davis Blackwood stood at the crossroads of past and future, no longer torn between them but anchored firmly in the present, creating with her own hands the legacy she would pass to generations yet unborn. The land had chosen its guardians, and they had chosen each other, proving that even when time itself seemed to bend against them, love and determination could forge a path forward. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.